look at specialized masters. If there's one area of business school activity that's really been just a hot ticket in the last few years, it's only been recently that numbers for the full-time MBA have picked up, but from the masters in management to the masters in finance, business analytics, supply chain, climate change, digital marketing, business schools have been incredibly busy building this portfolio of very exciting programs, many for a pre-experienced audience. So we're not necessarily waiting 4, 5, 6 years until we might be applying to business school. My name is Matt Symonds. I'm a co-founder of Fortuna. I write about these trends for specialized masters and other aspects of business education for Forbes, Bloomberg, the BBC, The Economist, and co-host the Centre Court MBA and Masters Festivals. Perhaps some of you joined us a couple of weeks ago with John Byrne and the team from Poets and Quants as we welcomed admissions directors and career services directors from business schools across Europe, Asia, North America for the Fortuna Masters Festival. So we felt that it would be appropriate as a next step to bring together so many of my colleagues from Fortuna who really have the sort of background and understand some of these trends. As you know, with Fortuna, with this dream team of former admissions directors from I think I have over 35 colleagues that were either associate deans, managing directors, associate directors from the world's top business schools. So it's great to have you with us for today's first session. And just in terms of reaching out to Fortuna and all of that insider expertise, just on the slides that we're running, the idea of talking with us, finding out based on your situation, whether you're a senior in college, whether you're thinking about, do I wait a couple of years and go for the full-time MBA, or should I jump in for the specialized masters? Well, we'll be able to talk through all of those different options and, of course, consider how you can put together the strongest possible applications. There's so many resources on Fortuna's website, the deep dives that we do that take this really close look at not just at where people have studied, what they've studied, where they've worked, the positions they've held before joining the business school classes, both MBA and masters of the world's top schools. So for tonight's webinar and focus, I'm delighted to be joined by colleagues with such wonderful experience, starting with Lisa Bevel. Lisa is one of my co-directors at Fortuna and is the former MBA admissions director at IE Business School in Madrid. Staying in Europe, Emma Bond, another co-director who was a former senior manager of admissions at the London Business School. And I'm also delighted to welcome Julia Brady, a co-director at Fortuna, who knows the top US Midwest schools like nobody else. She was a former managing director at Kellogg MBA, and a former senior associate dean at University of Chicago. So you can imagine, with this sort of group pulled together, we look forward to a very insightful hour with you talking about different specialized masters. Now, perhaps Lisa, I can start just with that bigger, broader question about why somebody would pursue a specialized master. Nobody has to go to business school to make a success of their career, right? But there are some great options out there.
So thank you, Matt. It's a pleasure to be here. So in my role at IE, I also led admissions for the Masters in Management at a time when we had a portfolio restructuring. And so we really talked about what were the difference in profiles, the opportunities between an MBA versus a Master in Management. And I think that specialized masters offer a unique alternative to allow people to jump in, learners, young professionals to jump in and continue on their journey. Specialized masters is really a broad topic, so we could consider there are two areas. Matt mentions, there are lots of different masters. One might be the master in management, which is more generalist. So to carry on specifically for someone who comes from a more technical or arts background that says, I'd like to add on to that experience and gain some greater depth and challenge myself in the area of general management business. However, there's also an opportunity to go into a specific area, which would be a lot of what Matt mentioned, digital marketing, big data, data analytics, specific programs that have content that are providing opportunities to explore and discover skills that are needed now and that will continue to be needed in the future. And there's a huge demand for those skills. So really, why a specialized master would be to take advantage of this moment when there might not be the best job alternatives upon graduation, to really advance yourself and get an edge up on business in general, or on a specific skill or area that you're passionate about, and take advantage, especially now in the pandemic. I think that says a lot as well about your, individual's motivation, skills in terms of continuing on in education in these uncertain times, and shows a lot about the opportunity to continue developing in terms of leadership during that program, because of everything that the program provides in terms of case study and team opportunities to develop as leaders. So it's really a great opportunity to jump into, especially now.
Right. So, the world has been turned upside down in the last 7-8 months in a way that none of us could have anticipated. But investing in yourself, and I guess Emma, Lisa was talking about some of those options as we see, the opportunities in supply chain, e-commerce, all of these, if anything, have had a very strong pandemic, if we can describe it that way. Looking at London Business School, and in fact many of the European business schools, this has really been their niche. Some of these schools have had masters in management for 140 years. LBS, obviously has one of the top programs in Europe, and that's far more oriented to someone coming out of college or in the first year or two, as opposed to the MBA slightly later on. Can you talk us through those different options?
Yeah, hi Matt. I let you know we're just, I think, about to have a big thunderstorm here with immaculate timing. So if my reception suddenly goes, that's probably why. It's interesting. Julia was talking about, the different types of programs that are around for people coming out of their undergraduate degree, and so the requirements kind of differ depending on what sort of program you're aiming for. So certainly, if you are looking to move into a specialist program, so an analytics degree or a master's in finance, the requirements are going to be different than they are perhaps for a master's in management. But there's one thing that I guess sort of is standard across the board, and that is strong academics. So again, depending on the program, and you have to do your due diligence if you're looking to move into a management role, into a management degree, then a lot of the schools will allow you to come from a background sort of across disciplines. So you can come from a traditional commerce background with your undergraduate degree, or you can come from a liberal arts background. And one of the things that the programs look for is to bring in a diverse class, the same way as they do for the more experienced programs. And someone coming from law or liberal arts or history degree brings in a completely different perspective. But across the board, there is definitely a demand that you have performed well in your degree. If on the other hand, you're looking to apply to one of those specialist masters, then a lot of the schools will ask that you have a degree that's particularly strong in quant skills, so a commerce degree or a stats degree or a finance degree or something along those lines. But yeah, there's certainly been a huge increase in demand over the last few years, and you see all the schools kind of widening their portfolios and jumping on the bandwagon, if you like, as we go through. Did you want me to move on and talk about other things that the schools are interested in with those candidates?
I think we'll probably get into sort of how to position your candidacy and what the admissions office is looking at. But I'd love to bring in Julia, because of course with that US perspective, Julia, whether it's Kellogg, Chicago Booth, the MBA has been the flagship for many business schools in the last century even. But there is this growing range of options, including some pre-experience options. The MMM Michigan Ross, Duke, even Yale and Cornell are now getting into the pre-experienced masters in management. So it has a very distinct place in the portfolio of what Kellogg and other schools offer. Is that right?
It does, and I think, you know, as Emma touched on, you know, it's a great segue for individuals that might have, you know, a liberal arts background and kind of looking for something to launch into a career. And as I oversaw, so when I was with Kellogg, I oversaw the evening weekend program, but also the Master Science Management Studies, and often counseled prospective students on, you know, that decision to attend. And it's really looking at, you know, what that journey is, sort of I'd say, you know, just going back to when, you know, thinking about the value of a program like this, you know, it also can be, you know, these are often a faster time to degree. So that many of the Master Science and Management or MIM programs are, you know, 10 to 11 months, different format. So, you know, in contrast to where, you know, with Kellogg, the approach was very broad. At U Chicago, I was in a school that was, you know, we affiliated with Booth, but it was a different college. So we were able to, in developing our specialized masters, we really worked across the institution. So we brought in, so for instance, the Master Science Analytics, which was one of the first, I think launched it in 2014, and it really quickly took off. We were able to also, you know, launch and leverage some expertise from Booth, but also from the computational science area at U Chicago. And then what we've seen is kind of, again, more and more specialization. So a few years later, I was very involved with the design and launch of a Master Science Biomedical Informatics. And so in that case, it was developed in close partnership with the medical school, but also leveraging, again, sort of the best of, you know, management theory and leadership skills, and again, and those things, but for many individuals that were looking to get off the bedside in healthcare, or looking to pivot and enter healthcare. And I think the other thing that we've seen, at least in some of the US programs with the specialized masters, with the focus is they develop some very focused industry relationships and partnerships. So that exposure to career opportunities and relationships, if someone is very focused, can you know, be a real strength.
Right. Now, we talk about different areas of a university, or, you know, with the business school and those different relationships. Does that mean then, as someone is thinking, well, you know, I could wait until I'm my late 20s and do an MBA, you know, I could load up on electives in the second part of a 2-year full-time MBA program to really, you know, whether that's healthcare, data analytics, you know, finance, all of these things that are part of that broader program remit. What do you think is the real attraction this early? And I speak as someone perhaps who still hasn't quite worked out the career trajectory I'm on. You know, sometimes it's difficult to work out at the age of 21, 22 where we're headed. But do you think it really is intended then for someone who's got that initial undergrad and sort of says, yeah, here's my passion, and the specialized masters best fits with that?
You know, from what I've seen, it has some of the more specialized masters do tend to be that might be more mid-career, like a little later. They have a little more experience, more focus. Some have other degrees. So I know we're going to talk a little bit about, you know, if also thinking MBA, you know, these credentials actually can be very complementary. So that's where I've seen, whereas pre-experience can be a good, like a perfect example. One of our students in the Kellogg program was a theater major, and very talented, but realized he was probably better off making a career in the business of theater. So the Master Science Management Studies was a great segue and sort of prepared him to be competitive in those interviews.
Got it. Now, of course, the idea, Lisa, of spending a year or two in Madrid, you know, whether I've done my undergrad in Cleveland, Ohio, or anywhere else in the world, it sounds irresistible. As an admissions office, receiving an application to a specialized master's, are you really then looking to see the coherence of, where this program fits at this stage? You talked about, complementing perhaps broader liberal arts, or a very diverse initial academic undergraduate background. So in terms of what you're then looking for as a school, is it sort of coherence and sort of the achievability of those next career steps?
Mm-hmm. I think in general, in admissions, there's a strong focus on coherency and alignment with the school to make sure that the person is on a career path and that the school is going to be able to meet their expectations in the next step in that journey of their career path. It's true for younger profiles, so those pre-experience or recent graduates. A lot is going to come down to those real human skills in terms of where do I envision myself in the future? How can this school and this program really add to my learning to help position me better in the job market? How are my communication skills? How are my team skills? Because there's so much learning that's going to happen in specialized masters, it's making sure that someone has the autonomy and the ownership to really embrace that learning experience. And these specialized masters are intense. They're very different from typical undergraduate degrees, even undergraduate degrees that have strong team focus and might be using cases. The level of expectation from professors, the exposure and expectation in terms of learning and taking on and taking ownership of your own experience is definitely greater than at the undergrad level. So the maturity level needs to be there to say that I'm ready and to show the alignment that this school and this program is really going to help me on my learning journey. I think another thing to consider is also the job market. A lot of these specialized masters are becoming so popular because there's a strong demand in the job market for these specific skills. And there are really two routes for that pre-experienced recent graduate in terms of the very diverse undergraduate background. Might be more technical, might be more liberal arts and wanting to get a leg up in appreciation for business. And so going into what might be a more general master in management. Or as well, those that come from business or come from a technical degree that say, I'm really passionate about technology and everything that's happening in technology, or about logistics and supply chain, and want to gain greater skills to jump into the job market ahead, to not just take the basic level, but to have a greater exposure to what is the industry. And so I think we have to consider many different elements in terms of admissions. Some are that career path where people are headed, making sure that the program is going to align with their expectations, and then also making sure that they're going to be adding valuable contributions to the team and to the program experience, and have the maturity level to continue on that journey, because it is a definite jump from undergrad.
Right. I think GMAT reports that is it about 2/3 of those that show interest in taking the GMAT express interest beyond the MBA and specialized masters. The three that really dominate, Emma, are the masters in management, the masters in finance, and the masters in business analytics. Now, earlier you talked about, for a program like Biz Analytics, and I would imagine for the masters in finance, of course, an admissions office wants to make sure that you've got those core quant or analytical skills that will serve you very well in the program. But perhaps you can take us through each of those, starting with the masters in management, because this is in either straight out of college or typically a year or two after you've graduated. So it's not like you've been working at a big investment bank for the last 4 or 5 years or in strategy consulting. How does the admissions, what are they then looking for across academics, community engagement, and the professional internships and experience you have?
It's an interesting question, and one of the things that's sort of really actually surprised me the last couple of years working quite a lot with clients who are applying to these programs is actually the level of just everything really that they have. They have these amazing academics, quite a few of them, and a lot of the schools seek some kind of work experience. So LBS, for example, ESA, they're looking for sort of up to around 2 years of experience for the Masters in Management program. Doesn't have to be full-time experience, but certainly some exposure to business context. So internships. INSEAD, for example, with their sort of Newman program, they are less directed about work experience that candidates need, but they do say that any work experience is valuable to the program, and that can be within the context of sort of leadership roles, business, community engagement, volunteering, that kind of thing. So any kind of exposure outside, I guess, the academic arena does bring value to the program, and it allows you to contribute more as a student. It allows you to engage more with your colleagues. In addition to that, obviously there are kind of the basic data point things. As I said, the academics, a lot of schools require a GMAT for these programs, some level of work experience, but then there are definitely the kind of more holistic side of a candidate. So definitely extracurriculars, and that's where people really can, sort of sell themselves in terms of the things that they've done outside the classroom. But also these, Lisa was mentioning maturity, these sort of personal characteristics that mean that people can sort of come into this very demanding academic program, which has a high practical focus, whether it's as you say, a master's in finance or whether it's a master's in management. So they need to be showing ambition, they need to be showing drive. And one thing which is becoming, I think, more and more apparent is that they do need to have some idea on career planning. A lot of the schools ask for some idea of where these candidates are looking to go post-MEM or post-masters in finance or post, masters in analytics or management, or, whatever it is. And it's a big ask for someone who's in their early 20s, who's just come out of university. They might have done a couple of internships. But, there's a lot of sort of thought process that needs to go into working out what those career plans are. And again, it doesn't mean that you are necessarily held to that by the time that you graduate, but you do need to have done your kind of period of self-reflection and have some idea of where you want to go by the time you graduate. But definitely, I think those kind of core basics, the additional things like maturity, potential, and I think particularly this year, initiative. I think it's something that schools are looking for. They don't, these degrees golden ticket to the ideal job. So people that can show initiative in terms of outreach and exploring their career sort of possibilities will go far with the admissions team, particularly in the
Right. Now, both Chicago, Northwestern, Kellogg attract those very academically gifted candidates. Julia, makes me wonder what I did with all of my undergraduate years. And combined with that, GMATs, GREs, perhaps we can look at how those different tests will provide helpful data points. But both Emma and Lisa point to sort of fit with a school culture. Now, whether it's that sort of academic rigor that the University of Chicago is justifiably known for, or that very sort of collaborative approach that is really at the heart of Kellogg, is this something that you think is also then imprinted in the minds of the admissions office of how does this individual align with the culture of our school?
Absolutely, and I think, and that's where with Kellogg and this concept and the idea of also like brave leaders and being able to really stand up for ideas and defend them, yet do it in a collaborative way, was a value that's instilled across programs. So there were some of these aspects not only that we were looking on the front end for the pre-experienced masters, but we also infused into the experience co-curriculary. And then at U Chicago, where yes, Chicago Booth, the rigorous kind of the quantitative reputation, that rigor and critical thinking is a U Chicago value. It's not just a Booth value. So, in many ways, again, I think as people are starting to consider these programs, it is looking more broadly, not just at the school and the unit and the program, but also that school and how they might be, able to push themselves in these different disciplines. And I think also in looking at schools outside of traditional MBA programs that offer these, because, for instance, Brown University now has a Master of Science Innovation Management that is STEM certified. There are also some very strong public institutions that have some great focus programs, like Georgia State's Robinson College of Business has a Master of Science Commercial Real Estate Management that's incredibly highly ranked. So I think it's really looking at what are those things, again, you're looking to get in terms of, that career and professional development, but also what's the school experience going to provide. And whereas, again, at U Chicago, there's the academic rigor and the campus environment, whereas there's some other schools like a Georgia State is located in Atlanta. And so you have these other dynamics to take into account as well.
Right. Kellogg, for the full-time MBA program in round 3, extended deadline, but saw application volumes jump by close to 60%. But maybe embedded in that, of course, was a decision to waive or be very flexible around GMAT and GRE scores. As I think about, certainly a pre-experienced program with where you're not presenting 4 or 5 years working for a Fortune 500 company, do these test results take on an even greater importance, Julia, for a school like Kellogg or Chicago as they assess an applicant?
I think, so there's tests, but I think overall academic performance and that ability to perform in the classroom, because one thing there over time with the Kellogg program and just some need to shift it, we started to co-enroll. There would be some courses the MSMS students would take that would be with the evening MBA students. So being able to perform at a certain level, tests are one indicator. I think we're just in a very strange time with the tests, with the pandemic, and even some institutions, even prior to that, were questioning the value, but it can be a very important kind of another good way to show kind of that discipline and focus, and also the level of seriousness. But one thing that we would look at with Kellogg, the pre-experienced students, we would definitely look at their performance on, even though they might have been liberal arts, how did they do in more quantitative classes? We had boot camps that were offered ahead. We definitely made sure there was some, student support, but, that mix of going in that they could really handle the rigor and discipline of the program.
Right. So, Lisa, as we talk about a timeline, I mean, even as we look at 2020, schools that had typically a deadline for their specialized master's program in the middle of January, within a month, 2 months, not just in Spain and UK and across North America, suddenly people's graduating plans from college were changing. The job market was, just falling off a cliff. And so the idea of planning an ideal timeline went out of the window, and then people were scrambling. But as you sort of take that step back and say, okay, as we look at this next admissions cycle, what is a good timeline for putting together each of these different components that will go into the application?
So there is a lot that goes into each and every application. And so the first learning would say it takes more time than we appreciate to really have a process for reflection, to consider how to craft that vision of the next career step beyond a master's program. So for recommendations in terms of timing, it's never early enough would be my recommendation, because everything takes longer than we expect. And often in the discovery process, whether that be self-discovery or in discovering institutions, schools, programs, we find there's a fascinating world out there. A lot of times people are surprised at how many great offers there are from so many different schools. And even what we're discussing, do I want to take a more general master management approach? Do I want to go into finance or business analytics? Do I want to consider supply chain? And so there is a discovery process. Considering a timeline for 2021, I would say now is a great time to apply. The second big learning, I think, in what I've seen, is that people tend to decide this is what I'm going to do and then apply. And I would encourage people to use the application process as part of that discovery. A lot is defining who you are, what value you bring to a program, and then what programs are out there and how you align with those programs and those schools, the values of those schools. And you can do that far in advance and consider the process, the discovery process through the application, presenting the application, and then also the interview process. Following admission, hopefully admission, then there are also a lot of opportunities to go on campus. Right now, there's not much travel happening. So I would encourage even more so to anticipate the application process. Then following decision, the final decision, then consider maybe visiting when we're able to travel a little bit more, or speaking with students or alumni. I think in terms of timing, the process last year was a bit crazy, but looking forward, I don't know about you, but everything seems to take a little bit longer than it used to. There's definitely more of adaptation. So I would encourage everyone to consider now as a great time to start and to really leverage the application process as a time for personal reflection and discovery. I know, Matt, you support that always, and I do as well, that it's a great opportunity to really take advantage of the application process.
It is. It holds up this wonderful mirror for sort of that introspection and self. So here's my yes/no question to you, Lisa. With as a director of admissions and all of the many applications you've read, could you instantly tell when someone had taken that time and there was just that depth and sort of thoughtfulness and how it really applied to the individual?
I think so. I definitely think you can see when someone stands out as being truly authentic. And it doesn't mean that they have all the answers, but they've taken the time to formulate their responses that show introspection, alignment, tapping into their values, and really that reflection on their possible career path. Not that it might change, but that at that moment of application, they're really thinking critically about where they would like to go and the steps to get there.
Right. Now, Emma, you had sort of brought up this idea in this year in particular, even the sort of the grit, the adaptability that individuals have shown, as they've been faced with lockdowns and everything else that the pandemic has brought. Now, already some of these master's programs, in addition to LBS, Imperial College Business School very well. The program, they have a master's in business analytics that has more applicants per place than Stanford's MBA program. I mean, these programs are insanely popular. So given that, and an economic downturn very often leads to a jump in application volumes and numbers, is this a good or a bad time to be applying given the pandemic?
Well, I think, it comes back to that idea of the point that Lisa was making about your application. I think if you go through a genuine period of and you put yourself, authentically on the page in your application and you make it as strong as it can possibly be, then you should just as well apply now as, like next year or whatever. The pandemic is there, but the world keeps turning, and in a couple of years' time, hopefully things will have improved with the job scene again. If you look back to 2008 and back I was working at BCG for a few years, and at that point when everything went very flat with hiring, the firms were saying we can't do what we did in 2001 where we just stopped hiring, because then our pyramid and everything, the way we run our hiring model gets out of balance. So I don't think that firms will stop hiring. The careers teams at a lot of the top schools who run careers for these specific programs, for these early career programs, will tell you that there is demand for them. That's, hence the increase in programs that offer analytics training, that offer specialists, as well as just the general management roles. So yes, there will be more competition. I think it's pretty now that application numbers in the first rounds of this year have been very high. But most of the people applying for them are up for that challenge and would consider that if they put the effort into the application, they have the story and they have the profile to back themselves. But yeah, it will be tough. I think that's fair to say. So I think that real effort in your application and taking the time to work out your career and Also to get to know your school so that you really understand the program that you're applying to. You're making sure that you're the right fit will be absolutely key this year.
Right. And I suppose as we dig down, it's easy, Julia, to sort of talk ourselves out of, well, there are thousands of people applying, why would a school be interested in me? As we look at any of the specialized masters, Kellogg, London Business School, IE have all made great progress in sort of gender balance in the MBA classroom. As you look at the specialized masters, is that an equal challenge for the masters in finance or business analytics?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it really varies program by program, because also sometimes it depends the age. So what we found with the, again, the pre-experience, I know we had a couple of classes that were very close to 50-50 gender representation. And then the Master Science Analytics was probably similarly balanced at UChicago to the MBA program. Master Science Biomedical Informatics, initial classes when I was still there skewed, I wouldn't say skewed more female, but compared to as maybe 40% of our applicants were female. Again, and in that case, just given some of the careers that were represented and the sort of opportunities as part of it. So I think I do want to go back to, as with Emma mentioned, and you touched on with the career prospects, that one of the things in evaluating potential schools and right fit schools, also really look at, industry advisory board. So again, if we're thinking more specialized, what are their connections? How involved are these individuals? Because again, oftentimes these programs do have smaller cohorts. They might lead to, some very unique opportunities depending on sort of the connection. So even though with UChicago, we knew that for the first class of our biomedical informatics program, the students, they might have felt they were taking a bit of a risk coming into a program that hadn't been previously established. So we balanced that with relationships, again, across the different, both UChicago alums representing different programs, but also different industry connections. So we made sure that from a career outcomes perspective, there was a lot of practical experience, but also on the recruiting side as well. So I think that's just another thing to maybe look for.
Right. It's so, we're seeing this incredible demand and globally, it's we've often talked with the MBA of sort of demand from Indian male engineers. It's interesting that you sort of speak to that gender balance. So Lisa, it's going to be competitive. Lots of people, have figured this is a great time to go back to business school, certainly coming out the sort of career paths that Julia was describing in those industry connections, coming out of these programs in the summer of 2022 or summer of 2023, incredible opportunities. So how do I stand out? How do I make sure you've talked about already that authenticity, taking the time? Mm-hmm. You can never take too much time. What would your pointers be? To anyone that's following us for this webinar, in terms of just those key steps that you need to take to make sure that your story stands out?
Mm-hmm. I think it's challenging because we typically don't stop at 21, 22 to say, what makes me unique? What are my strengths? What are my values? What do I stand for? And at the same time, there's definitely a shift in terms of focus and in that younger generations want to do something that's meaningful for them. And so what I would start off by saying is giving yourself that time to move away from the impulsive instinct to just throw something together, but to really give yourself time, a blank sheet of white paper, and to write, what do you stand for? And maybe we're saying strengths, values, but what is meaningful to you? I think that's the first start. And then try to move away from the comparison factor. Like you said, there's so many great candidates. Why would I even apply? Well, you're not seeing the inside from admission standpoint. So in the School of Human Sciences and Technology at IE, where you have a lot of the specialized masters that are content specific, you have a higher percentage of men in let's say some of the technical, so master in big data, more the analytics side, but you have a higher percentage of women in some of the customer experience, human resources and talent development, communications. And when you're an applicant, you don't have that vision. And so you often compare, well, what makes me stand out? And so I would take the time, not compare, and then really maybe do a 360 with your friends and family, your professors. Well, what makes me unique? And then work on crafting that story. And what's really important is showing the alignment of why that particular program, why this moment in your career. And that takes some time to really craft that story based on your key themes, your key drivers. What is really motivating you?
Right, and with that 360, Emma, it's then not what is it the admissions office wants to hear, falling into that trap perhaps, but maybe friends can see accomplishments and achievements to their name. So it's great to have that external feedback and perhaps bring to your attention some of the different qualities and characteristics that could really then connect with the admissions office.
Absolutely. I missed some of that, Matt. I lost you about halfway through, so I apologize if I'm going to go off track with this. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, definitely getting input from people around you and that kind of understanding of how others see you as opposed to just what you think of yourself. I mean, whereas 20 years on top of what these candidates have, that's always valuable. In terms of increasing your kind of ability to stand out, certainly the school outreach has been obviously in these at the campus in the same way that you would. There are endless opportunities to do research. There are chats, there are webinars, there are one-on-one consultations with some programs. And I think Julia mentioned before that a lot of these specialized classes are quite a bit smaller, so you can connect quite easily with some of the admissions teams. You can certainly do more outreach to students and really sort of boost what you know about yourself with in conjunction with what you know about the school and what you know.
Right, and I mean, in terms of the outreach, schools seem to have been very sort of nimble and quite innovative in terms of different ways of connecting. Presumably, it's not just, well, hey, I could find a master's graduate that lives in my hometown. I mean, that itself, I'm sure, would be a great conversation. But even as you think about their own passions and how those might overlap, I mean, the schools have so many different clubs and tracks and activities. So what could they do? Sort of look at someone that was a president of a particular club. That would be a great person for them to talk with.
Absolutely, and I think more and more we're seeing with the clients that we're working with, we're doing genuine outreach to things like LinkedIn. So connecting through social media. Most of the schools have club sections where you can you're interested in contact the treasurer of the consulting club. You can start up a genuine dialogue, but also around career planning. I keep going back to that, so I think it's really, really key for some of these programs. Connecting with HR departments or companies that you're interested in working with, after you finish your degree. Showing initiative, not expecting the career teams, even though they're great, there are a lot of these programs, but not expecting them to do all the work for you. So all of these things kind of are going to add value. And then just at a sort of more basic, one of the things that always stands out with these profiles, because they have less experience behind them usually, or always, is that they have really strong extra. So I think adds value if you're involved. You can showcase that through the fact that you've played in a football team or a netball team, you've played in whatever it might be. You can showcase any volunteering work. If you run, do a charity fundraiser. If you play music, set up a choir. If you, for argument's sake, play rugby. I'm a New Zealander, so it's also, think about taking the lead and coaching. So there are lots of ways that you can show that these programs look. outside of, I guess, the work experience that you would get if, for example, you're applying to an MBA and you have 4 or 5 years behind you.
Right, and presumably if you bring up a football team, certainly if you're applying to a business school in Madrid, you need to do your homework and name drop the right teams, right, Lisa? Now, we talk about what we're looking to then do well and share. Julia, there must have been times when you sort of had held your head in your hands, someone applying to Northwestern Kellogg, and it had U Chicago in the application or some other blunder. I mean, we laugh about that one, but I mean, you've all seen that in applications. What would you sort of identify as other either pitfalls or just mistakes where people fail to really do themselves justice?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Well, I mean, one of the things that, has been emphasized right now is that this is a good time to be thinking about next fall for these programs. So first and foremost, don't rush. And so the value of that is making sure, again, do the homework, the understanding the curriculum, the faculty, the industry connections, and the more that you can authentically make a case for why you want this school, as well as, again, as and some of this comes from my years as a hiring manager leading teams in corporate world too. But it's amazing how, for me, how candidates can either stand out or stand out in a bad way when they haven't done their homework. And so that, being prepared to really show that you're connecting the dots with how your vision fits with the school. If there is, say, an interview, or if you have a chance to engage in a webinar or other things, asking good questions, showing thoughtful insights, taking the initiative to do a little extra work really can shows that level of seriousness. So I think there's that piece. And then the other theme that was touched on as well, where I've seen candidates kind of rush things, either whether there's not a deep level of reflection, or maybe they feel they're trying to fit a mold that they think the school is looking for. And I think what we've heard throughout the Matt, as you probably recall from all the center court discussions, is that schools, these programs across the board, MBAs and otherwise, are really looking for a diverse mix of students and people that are going to add to the educational experience. So I think both Emma and Lisa pointed out the importance of of maturity. So even if you're 22, 23, that you've done reflection, you have sort of that mix of some vision, but at the same mind, you're coming as a seeker, you're open-minded to other things. But it's okay to be like, here's what I think I want. Here's stuff that I haven't figured out, be a little vulnerable in the process. And I can see that often, if done in the right way, can be an asset.
Yeah, that vulnerability, and it brings me back to something, Lisa, that you'd said right at the beginning of the webinar about the very human side of this. Now, we've submitted applications with solid, well-balanced test scores. If we now reach the interview stage, Lisa, I mean, this is where I'm always reminded that all three of you were admissions officers. You weren't in this to just sort of turn people down and reject people. And I see the interview as an extension of that, of wanting somebody to shine in that interview context. The chances, I guess, are in the months ahead that many of those interviews will take place virtually on Zoom or other platforms. What is your advice for the interview? Is it sort of just pulling everything together at that point, or do you think there are certain things that you should really take this opportunity to then connect with the school to talk about?
I definitely think the interview is an excellent opportunity, especially in younger profiles where there's less to go on. You don't have as much professional experience, or it's more limited professional experience. So the interview can be really important. The interview is important in general, and it's the opportunity to engage and have a dialogue. I did see a question about what we could speak to if people have professional experience. And I think I could answer that question as well with this one, in saying, how are you going to demonstrate the learning from whatever experience you have? And so in the interview, that's when you can bring your story to life, not just talk, often about these are the accomplishments that we have in the application, or this is my career projection. But you can bring the stories to life, and that's where you can really showcase the learning. And that stands out in terms of the content of the learning, but also in terms of the mindset. There's a learner's mindset that I'm here to continue to grow and learn. I think there's nothing worse than being in an interview where someone feels, is communicating that they know it all. Because the question is, well, then why are you doing this master's program if you know it all? So having that learning mindset is really critical. And when you have previous experience, you can bring that in. What did you learn? Then the other thing is to show vulnerability. Yes, how you've been able to learn. Empathy. I think another pitfall and that you should be aware of in the application and in the interview is to speak in we. Well, this is what we did. When we have someone who has I did this and I did that and I did the other, that comes with some sort of maturity. We want to demonstrate everything that we were a part of, but there's very little that comes alone in terms of an I. And so just to be humble at the same time as show that drive that Emma was talking about. And finally, striking the right tone, being comfortable with that authentic communication of the things we do well and the things that we're still developing. And so in order to do that well, it takes a lot of practice. And so practicing with someone in terms of interviewing, especially if you haven't had a lot of practice in interviewing, you might think, oh, I know my story, I can share it. And then you get to that moment, whether it be online or in person, and the nerves take over and you're stuttering over your own words and it feels very uncomfortable. So the practice is really important to have that authentic communication, be able to share your story, strike the right tone, and consider the nuances of language, because admissions officers and interviewers are really paying attention to the language, the tone, the learning from behind what you're sharing.
Right. And I guess, from all three of you and your background and experience, just this sense of vulnerability, humility, tone, that someone's saying, oh, I must shine in everything that I share with them. We all have skeletons perhaps in our closet, or, a moment in the interview that doesn't go well. We can catch your breath, right, and start again, maybe answer that question again. Now, one question that we did have coming in, Emma, and that we wanted to address on the webinar is where the specialized masters, particularly perhaps the pre-experienced masters, might fit in an even longer sort of business school experience. Someone that does picture themselves doing an MBA, maybe 4, 5, 6 years from now, doing maybe the pre-experienced masters in finance, doing a master's in management in those early years coming out of college, would that then preclude you from being competitive? Lisa just said, don't have all the answers. Now, if you've done a master's in management, maybe you have some of the answers. Would that then mean that an MBA admissions office would look and say, no, we don't see why this makes sense? Or am I not understanding that one?
No, I think, as you carry on through your career, you might think you know it all after your master's in management, but I think if you go back into the workplace and work for a few more years, you pretty quickly work out that there is still a whole lot more to learn, and it just throws up more questions. There was an interesting discussion at LBS, as I'm sure there has been at other schools, when they started building their portfolio of specialised master's degrees, about whether or not these programs would cannibalise, people who are applying to the MBA. And it's not turned out that way. And certainly what the school sees is that people who've done the specialised masters may well actually add an additional pipeline of interest for the MBA at a later date. So I think, the MIMs and the MFAs and all these, acronyms that are flying around for the specialised masters, they give you an edge at a particular time in your career. You then go back into the workplace, you gain more transferable skills, but you also find out a lot about what you don't know. And then I think there is certainly room to go back and explore an MBA or a more senior, an executive program or a Sloan Masters or whatever it might be further on in your career. And I would be very hesitant to ever think that an MBA admissions committee would look down on somebody having done a specialised program earlier in their career. I would think that they would value it, certainly, as they move through and progress. And it is a journey, I think, as Lisa was saying earlier on.
Right, and it speaks to Lisa's point about curiosity and having that learning mindset, and at different phases of the career. So perhaps, Julie, as we wrap up this webinar, we have seen this tremendous growth and how schools are responding with, this growing portfolio of programs. Sometimes they're shorter, the opportunity cost might be lower, very affordable. But whether it's the MBA or the specialized masters, and of course you've seen it from both sides as the student in the Kellogg MBA classroom and then as the MD at Kellogg, just perhaps your final thoughts on, why for any individual making this investment in yourself, and taking the time to go through this entire process, and enjoying that. Why does business school at this early stage, specialized or generalized, make sense?
Yeah, well, I think again, it's an opportunity to differentiate oneself. So again, whether it is a more generalized master's, so if you're early career, or if you have a particular interest and you are, it's a way to really stand out and also show this level of commitment to, again, the intellectual curiosity, learning about that career and the field that, kind of related to, okay, well, maybe down the road, there's something else I'd want to do. I mean, again, I started working on, as an admissions counselor, actually, as a full-time MBA student, when I was a student at Chicago Booth and was reviewing applications. My second year, I was in a leadership role, interviewing candidates. And we had a number actually of students that were applying for full-time. And this is, quite a bit of time ago. And that sort of commitment to invest in themselves and curiosity and being able to tell the story of sort of how this fits into their journey, found, incredibly valuable. And I think, again, as someone's thinking about that education landscape right now, there are so many options. And it's also really think about the opportunity. Things can be stackable. So you might have a master's in this, but you can get an MBA later, or it might be reversed, or you might be like someone like me who's working on a certificate in change management because that's something I'm interested in. And it's kind of fun to be back in the classroom, albeit virtual right now.
Right. Lisa, if there was any of the new courses and classes that you've seen pop up at IE Madrid and other business schools, is there one class you're like, oh, I'd love to join that particular class? What would it be?
So I was extremely fortunate to actually go back after my MBA and do an executive master in positive leadership. So I have to say that was my dream come true. And I was thrilled to do that. I think if I were to go back, I would look into digital transformation. So there is, I feel, have a very strong human side, and at IE you have the School of Human Sciences and Technology. And what I would like to focus more on the business transformation. So very similar to Julia in terms of change management, digital transformation, how to make that happen. So there's always an opportunity for more learning, without a doubt.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And with that thunderous storm that's outside, Emma, we now have the spotlight on you. It's a little bit like your sort of ballerina performance at the Covent Garden. If you could combine business school with the creative art, I mean, this is the beauty of it, right? You can come from so many different backgrounds, and that sort of combination, whether it's in digital transformation or career change, is there a course that you would love to take?
Oh, that's a tricky one because my degree is in English, nothing to do with business originally. I think for me it would be analytics all the way. I think, the whole combination these days of, I think the LBS's Masters in Analytics and Management is a really cool kind of program that blends, the analytics that you need to conduct the transformation, but then the communication and the management skills to actually, implement it. So I think that's a very good kind of program that sits at the junction of those two things, and it's doing very well for itself. And I think that's probably why. So yeah, that's probably a bit senior for that now in terms of age, I think, but that's something that I think is a really, really cool program that's out there.
Well, you've always been able to join the dots for us on these webinars, Emma, and I think, whether it's analytics, whether it's climate change, whether it's healthcare, I think it was the Associate Dean at MIT, Sloan, was talking about the Masters in Finance and saying, hey, the sense of purpose that Lisa spoke to earlier, finance is going to solve some of the world's thorniest problems, and business schools and the range of specialized masters that they have are right at the heart of that. So for the viewers that have been following us, as you were thinking about those next steps, and I think that wonderful sort of expression of positive leadership from all three of our panelists, do reach out to us at Fortuna to talk about your plans, next steps, and we'll be able to sort of share more insights that obviously are very personalized to your situation. We have many resources, as I said, on the website, and of course all of the different panels that we hosted at the Centre Court Masters Festival with INSEAD and LBS and IE and MIT Sloan and Northwestern. There was a fantastic list of schools. We'll be doing more of those events very soon. So thank you for joining us for this focus on the Specialized Masters, and of course my thanks to Lisa, to Emma, and to Julia for being with us today.